Video, I'm going to explore 5 simple tips to increase your physical activity level. Now, physical activity level is I believe, a very key lifelong healthy habit that's going to pay huge dividends. And we're going to go through and explain some terms. We're going to talk about what are the 5, I believe, the 5 simple ways that you can really increase your physical activity level. So let's define physical activity level. But before we do that, let's put it in a bigger context. Here's a bigger context. In a previous video, my wife Elizabeth showed you a formula that really explained about how much energy you expend throughout the day. It was the formula that's the T.E.E, total energy expended, equals the basic metabolic rate plus your physical activity level, or PAL, plus your they call it the thermic effect of food. Now that's, of course, your digestion, everything it takes when you eat. So those 3 things, your basic metabolic rate, your physical activity level, and your TEF, or thermogenic effect of food. Now, that's going to come up, and that's going to give you a total energy expended for the day. Now, this is a simple question. I think it's a simple answer. If you exceed your TEE every day, what happens? Well, you're gonna gain weight. And if you're trying to maintain a healthy weight, a normal weight, or if you're just doing weight management, you cannot have an overage day in, day out of your total energy expenditure. So now with the TE, let's define each term, and then we'll get into the PAL, or the PAL, which we're going to spend our time on today, because we're going to go through 5 tips on how you can increase your PAL. BMR, what's BMR? BMR is your basic metabolic rate. That is everything that it takes for your body to operate that does not include any activity or any effect from food. In other words, we're just talking about what's it take for your body to keep your brain functioning, your organs functioning, everything in your body. That's basic metabolic rate. Now in my case, my basic metabolic rate, if I have a sedentary day, don't do anything, is about 1,500 calories, just for me to exist sitting here in this chair. If I had a very sedentary day, I think it ends up being an extra 300 calories, so I think I ended up at 1,800 for the day with total energy expended, which is quite low. And that's including the TEF, the thermic effect of food. So 1,800, can you imagine that? So let's break this down. When we look at the basic metabolic rate, there's not much we can do to change that. And there's a calculator. When you click on our subscribe button, there's a calculator in the links on the YouTube page. And when you're on the YouTube page, you can click on that and you can calculate yours. It's based on your age, your weight, and your height. And that'll give you a pretty good idea of what your BMR is. Now let's talk about PAL. PAL is physical activity level. Now scientists like to use different terms that are a little bit more specific, so I want to use this because, being a scientist, I like the what they call it, specificity. So let's talk about PAL, physical activity level. They call it activity thermogenesis. So activity thermogenesis is defined as, and specifically thermogenesis, as the dissipation of energy through production of heat that occurs in specialized tissues, including adipose and skeletal muscle. So you can see that the term thermogenesis would be heat creating. Obviously, when you do some expenditure of energy, what's the first thing you notice? You sweat, you're hot, and that's good. That means you're expending energy. Your cells are working, they're putting out the byproduct, which is heat. So what I wanted to put that term out there for is when we talk about physical activity level, we're really talking about activity thermogenesis. Now, let's break that down further. There's really 2 activity thermogenesis that we're going to really get into, and that is the one that we're going to talk about today is called N.E.A.T. That's Non-Exercise Activity Thermogenesis. And then there's the second one for physical activity level, which is E.A.T, which is Exercise Activity Thermogenesis. That's really defined as purposeful exercise. So you say to yourself, I'm going to go out and get some exercise. I'm going to go out and have a time that I'm just going to focus on exercise. And typically, not always, but typically, E.T, exercise activity thermogenesis, is anything that's going to increase your heart rate. That's going to be anything from we call it a moderate activity level up to a strenuous activity level. And we'll break that down in the next video on E.T. But for now, let's talk about N.E.A.T, non-activity thermogenesis. It's the energy expended for anything we do that is not sleeping, eating, or sports-like exercise, purposeful exercise. Anything we do that's not part of those three categories. So that's what they call N.E.A.T. It ranges from anything from sitting up straight, standing, walking, to and from your desk at work, to and from the water cooler, going out in the back room and getting supplies. That's all part of N.E.A.T. Parking further away at the grocery store, at the place of work, that's N.E.A.T. That's non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And then also, this is a biggie, and we forget about this, activity that we can do that would maybe require us to use manual technique instead of automation. So you can go out and blow leaves in your yard with your leaf blower, or you can take a rake. You can get a snow blower if you live in the Northeast or in some of the colder climates, or you can shovel the snow. That is something that is N.E.A.T. That's not something that you personally did for exercise. It wasn't that you planned it, but it happened throughout your day as part of your daily living. So let's go through 5 ways to incorporate more N.E.A.T, more non-exercise activity thermogenesis in your daily activities to help develop healthy habits. And it's going to pay big dividends. Number 1, I think the most important thing you need to realize if you're going to incorporate this into your daily life to create a healthy habit of motion, of movement, is to understand the value of N.E.A.T. The value of it is so great, and people sometimes they say, "Well, I really want to get in shape, and I really want to take control of my health. I want to get, so much more stamina, and I'm going to start exercising." And a lot of times I think that's a great idea, and we're going to talk about that next video, why it's so important that you get to a point where you're doing exercise every week, and sometimes up to 5 times a week, at least 30 minutes. We're going to even back up even further. If you did 3 days a week, 30 minutes, that's a good start. Anything to get moving. And when you purposely go out to exercise is good, but we'll continue that in the next video. But let's talk about N.E.A.T right now. You got to understand that there's a lot of things you do every day that's going to add up to a lot of calorie or a lot of expenditure burn. And I think people don't realize just how much it is. I do. And we're going to talk about that when we get down a little bit further, but no, we're going to talk about it now. I got this watch, and I'm blown away on some days that I'll go for a walk with my wife, and we'll go for a hike, maybe a couple miles, maybe 3 miles. It's not a very big hike. And I'll look at my watch and I'll say that I reached my step goal. Wow. Other days, I'm in the pharmacy for 12 hours, and most of the time I'm behind a terminal, but I must make a lot of steps because it ends up on some days I look at my device, and it says I did 10,000 steps. So you start to realize just how many activities you do that you're really not exercising, but you're actually expending energy, which is fantastic. So number 1, understand the value of N.E.A.T. The amount of calories that maybe sometimes you're going to burn in a day, it sometimes matches or exceeds what you're going to do with, say, 60 minutes of exercise. Now, number 2, this is another big one. Choose a way to measure your non-exercise activities every day. Choose a way to measure. Choose a way to how much energy you're expending. And again, you can go with some of the devices out there. There's Samsung Watch, there's Apple Watch, there's Fitbit. There's a lot of other devices on the market that you can get, and I'd recommend that you invest in some of those. Now, if that's an issue, there's some very low expense ones too. A pedometer, because that's a very good tool. If you know how many steps, you can figure out your how much energy expended. Some people like heart rate monitors, some people like stopwatches. So there's a lot of inexpensive things. But number 2, importantly, find a way to measure. Number 3, explore the many types of N.E.A.T out there. And I'm just going to list a few because this is something that you're going to be doing as part of your, as part of my prescription for you as RXHealthyHabits is to recommend to you, that you find a way to keep exploring how to add to this list. But there's things for N.E.A.T that might surprise you, and one of them is posture sitting. There's a difference between sitting like this and sitting up straight. And of course, you heard that all your life from your parents or maybe your school teachers, sitting up straight. So look, when you're in classroom. But there's something to it when it comes to N.E.A.T because it takes more energy expended to sit up straight than it does to slouch. Here's one, standing. And a lot of people can relate to this during the pandemic when they were doing Zoom calls from work. They were doing a lot of sedentary activities, and they found that put some weight on. A lot of people that work in jobs where they're in front of a computer all day have found that they like the desk that they can stand, and at least for a part of the day. I'm fortunate in my profession, I get to stand all day. Sometimes it's a burden. But when I was 50 pounds heavier, it was a real burden to stand up for 50 pounds. It was actually difficult. My joints would be so sore. But standing, fidgeting. Sister Agnes Teresa used to tell me, Joey, do not fidget. You're always fidgeting. Why are you always fidgeting? Why are you always moving? Can't you sit still? Fidgeting also means that when you're standing someplace in a line, you don't have to just stand there. You can go back on both feet. You can tighten muscles. You can do some where you stand up on your tippy toes. That's fidgeting. Fidgeting does help with your N.E.A.T, your non-exercise activity. Strolling versus walking. Now there's walking, and that I would consider walking at a pretty brisk pace to be more of an exercise because you just plan to go out and walk. But strolling means you would park your car further away at the grocery store. You would park it further away at work. Strolling means you would take the garbage out. I tell you, today I took the garbage out, and this was a stroll to take out all the recyclables, but also all the boxes, because they pick up those here too, some other things that don't go in the recyclable. And all these boxes were out there, and they're piled up, and I'm like, I really should break these down. So I thought to myself, you know what, it can't be that much of that's not going to be that much of a neat activity. But I started doing it. And after 10 minutes of wrestling with these boxes, I'm like, you know what, that was a little bit of a chore. And I mean, it wasn't a challenge, but it was a chore to break them down. Here's my point. By saying to yourself, I want to break these down just because that's another activity I could do to get a little bit more expenditure, it was worth it. So here's another big one, and I think this one is probably one of the ones that people don't even think about as being, it's a neat activity, non-exercise activity, but it could be one that's going to lead you to a moderate to strenuous activity. Even though it's not exercise, it wasn't purposeful, it led to some real big expenditure, and that is doing more hand labor activities versus automation tools. You can buy a leaf blower, you can buy a snow blower, but if you can do some of those activities yourself, it might take you longer, might be a little bit more inconvenient on some days when you got to get up and go to work. But what I'm trying to say here is, are there some things you're doing right now that you do automated that you might want to say, you know what, I'm going to switch off and do them myself? And those are huge. And still, we're still talking about some of the simple ones that are common sense, mowing the lawn instead of, by hand, instead of jumping on the rider, taking the dog for a walk. These are just some simple things. But I guess what I'm trying to say there is you have to explore these. You have to be mindful of these. And you have to say, how can I get more of these? So that brings up number 4, and that's always be looking for creative ways to increase your list of N.E.A.T activities. You're in a constant search. I know that there's some ones that are just no-brainers when I think about creative ways. When I started really looking at N.E.A.T activities, stairs are a big one too. When you look at a creative way, is it that creative? Or is it just something you're mindful of? So number 4, what are some ways that you can really change your activities that you're doing on a daily basis? And you have to be creative. It's not that creative to take the stairs. My wife and I, in the interim, before we bought our home here in Las Vegas, we had an apartment for 6 months, and we had access to elevators. We're on the 3rd floor, but we would purposely park next to the entrance of the building, but we had stairs. So every time we come in, we'd do 3 flights, sometimes with groceries. And that's just a simple, creative way, and maybe something that we didn't really think about in the past. So number 4, constantly searching for those ways to do that. And number 5, this is probably one of the most important things I could stress. And you have to find a way to review your daily N.E.A.T activities. You have to find a way to look at it and compare. How'd you do this week versus last week, this month versus last month? I play a little game with myself. Like today, I went outside and did my hour and 10 minutes on my bike, got up to about 567 calories. It was only an hour and a half, hour and 10 minutes, wasn't that long. But now I know that I had that done. Can I add another 300 or 400 calories with some N.E.A.T? And I'll test you, there's some days I can add even more than that by just being mindful of the fact that, hey, I got this in for today. What more can I do to increase, I did my E.A.T, my exercise activity thermogenesis. Now let's see how much I can get with E.A.T. So hope that makes sense.